The forgotten phone call revealed the double life, turning pain into a tale of resilience. The old phone rang at 3:15 a.m., slicing through the stillness of the small, dimly lit apartment. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only other sound, a backdrop to the sharp, unrelenting tone that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. A moment passed, then another. Lena's hand hovered over the receiver, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected it to come now. A slow exhale left her lips, her fingers trembling as they finally closed around the cold plastic. The familiar, suffocating silence of the apartment swallowed her whole as she lifted the phone to her ear. There was no one on the line. Only the static-filled silence of a forgotten connection, a broken thread from a past she was trying so desperately to sever. Her gaze wandered to the cracked window, the dim light of the city streets beyond casting a shadow that stretched across the room. The world outside seemed impossibly far, distant, unreal. But this was her reality, a cramped space filled with memories she had hoped to forget. Yet, despite her best efforts, they never stayed away long enough. Lena sat still, waiting. Her chest tightened as she replayed the phone's ring in her mind, the unanswered question hanging like a specter in the air. It wasn't the first time the phone had called. But it was the first time she had answered. Lena's fingers tightened around the receiver. The silence, oppressive and unnerving, stretched on. She was about to hang up when a voice finally crackled through, low and barely audible. "Are you ready to hear the truth, Lena?" The voice didn't belong to anyone she knew. But her name cut through her like a blade, carving deep into a place she'd spent years burying. The truth. She hadn't wanted it. Not tonight. Not after everything. But that voice, there was something about it. A sharpness, an edge that felt too familiar. For a moment, Lena's mind flashed back, her eyes squeezing shut, her pulse quickening. Years of buried memories, faces, lies, and half-forgotten promises surged to the surface. She had never been able to escape them, no matter how hard she tried. A soft click, followed by a dull, rhythmic beat on the line. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but the catalyst was undeniable. Something had been set into motion, and Lena knew that this phone call wasn't a random mistake. Someone, somewhere, had decided it was time for her to confront the very life she had tried to leave behind. She pressed the receiver closer to her ear, her heartbeat thundering in her chest. The decision had already been made for her. The next day, the air outside felt different, heavier. Lena hadn't expected anything to change, but somehow, everything did. She stepped into the bustling streets, the noise of the city a stark contrast to the quiet torment that had settled within her. The phone call, the voice, the memories, it was all too much to ignore now. As she walked, a figure caught her eye, standing by the corner, leaning against a streetlight as if waiting for someone. His posture was relaxed, yet there was something sharp in the way he stood, as though he were prepared for anything. Lena stopped dead in her tracks. It wasn't the first time she'd seen him. But it was the first time their eyes met with any recognition. There was a moment, just a fraction of a second, where the world seemed to pause. The air between them thickened, charged. His gaze held hers, unreadable, but there was something undeniable in it. An invitation, a challenge. She didn't know which, but she felt it deep in her bones. She turned away, walking briskly now, trying to shake off the gnawing feeling that had begun to spread through her. But the encounter was not over. Not by a long shot. The phone never stopped ringing. It wasn't just the calls that came at odd hours, with no one speaking on the other end. It was the weight of the silence that followed each one, pressing against her like a suffocating fog. For weeks, Lena had tried to ignore it, burying herself in work and the numbing routine of her day-to-day life. But each ring, each crackling pause before the voice, seemed to pull her deeper into something she couldn't escape. At night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the echo of that mysterious voice still fresh in her mind. "Are you ready to hear the truth?" It hadn't just been a question, it had been a challenge. A dare. Her thoughts spiraled, pulling her further into a storm of memories. She couldn't help but remember the last time she saw him. The man at the street corner. The stranger who felt so familiar. She hadn't expected to see him again, but now, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was always just around the corner, watching. Waiting. Lena tried to go about her day, focusing on the mundane, but the unease settled deeper into her chest. She hadn't asked for any of this. She didn't want to revisit the past, didn't want to confront the shadows that had haunted her for so long. But the pull was undeniable. Every step she took seemed to lead her toward a revelation she wasn't ready to face. She could feel it, even now, the tension between her steps and the weight of the past. Something was coming, and she could no longer run from it. The next evening, Lena received an unexpected visit. She wasn't sure why she opened the door, why she let him in. Maybe it was because she had been expecting him, or maybe it was the quiet desperation in his eyes that made it impossible to say no. He stood there, his posture as calm as ever, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. The figure from the street corner, the one she couldn't forget. His name was Simon. That much she had learned. But beyond that, he remained an enigma, wrapped in shadows. Simon didn't sit. He simply stepped into her apartment, as if he already knew where everything was. His eyes scanned the room, his movements deliberate, measured. There was no rush, no sense of urgency. Yet, everything about him screamed that time was running out. "I've been trying to reach you," he said, his voice low, but steady. Lena didn't respond immediately. She simply stood there, unsure of how to proceed. "You're not alone in this," he continued, his gaze locking onto hers. "There are people looking for answers, and they'll do anything to stop you from getting them." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to laugh, to call him crazy, but the sincerity in his eyes stopped her. She had no idea what this was about, what game he was playing, but she could feel the pull, the gravity of something far larger than herself. For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope. But that spark quickly extinguished when Simon dropped a small, weathered envelope on the table between them. The seal was broken, the contents inside unreadable. It didn't take much to know that her life had just changed forever. The days blurred together, each one melding into the next. Lena found herself unable to escape the weight of Simon's presence in her life. He kept calling, always with cryptic information or warnings that only raised more questions. His visits became more frequent, and she began to wonder if she was slowly losing her grip on reality. Her work began to suffer, her relationships frayed by her growing obsession with the mystery Simon had thrust upon her. But it wasn't just that something had shifted within her. Her entire world felt unstable, and she didn't know who to trust anymore. She couldn't help but wonder if the phone call had been the first thread of a much larger web, one that was now tightening around her with each passing day. The phone rang again, and this time, it wasn't a mistake. It was Simon, calling from an unknown number. "They're closing in," his voice crackled through the line. "You need to decide what you're willing to lose." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of his words settling in her stomach. She had already lost so much: her peace, her stability, her sense of self. But now, it seemed, she was about to lose even more. The cost of the truth was no longer a distant threat, it was standing right in front of her, waiting for her to make a decision. With trembling hands, Lena hung up the phone. Her mind raced, every instinct screaming at her to run. But there was nowhere to hide. Not anymore. Lena hadn't slept in days. The phone calls, the mysterious envelope, Simon's cryptic warnings, they were all threads in a web that seemed to suffocate her more with each passing hour. She had tried to rationalize it. Tried to tell herself that she was simply caught up in the paranoia of something bigger than herself. But the truth was, she was tired. Tired of running from the past, tired of the constant dread that gnawed at her heart. It wasn't until the night the truth finally hit her that she realized how much she had been avoiding. The phone rang again, just like every other night. But this time, Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed the receiver with trembling hands, her breath shallow as she braced for the same haunting voice to crackle through. But it wasn't Simon. The voice on the other end was far more familiar. "Lena," it said, her name slipping from the speaker with a chilling ease. "It's me." Her pulse quickened, her mind racing. She couldn't place it at first, couldn't reconcile the voice with anything she had ever heard. But then it came crashing down in a wave of realization, a flood of memories that she had buried so deep they threatened to tear her apart. The voice belonged to her father. For years, she had believed him dead, lost to the wreckage of her childhood, a casualty of a broken family and a past she had desperately tried to forget. But here he was, alive, calling her like no time had passed. Like the years of silence, the lies, and the abandonment had never happened. The truth shattered her world. The one thing she had believed in, the one constant in her life, was gone. And in its place was a twisted reality she couldn't escape. The next few days felt like an eternity. Lena spent her waking hours alone, unable to escape the suffocating silence that followed her like a shadow. The world outside was unchanged, people still walked by, cars still passed, life still went on. But she felt detached, adrift in a world she no longer recognized. Her father's call had been a revelation, yes, but it was also a trap. Every moment since that phone call had been one of agonizing internal conflict. What did he want? Why hadn't he come to her all those years ago? What kind of man could abandon his daughter and then reappear as if nothing had happened? Simon had told her it was time to decide. But decide what? What was the price of knowing the truth? And more importantly, what would it cost to face it head-on? Lena found herself standing at the same window she had stared out of countless times, the city sprawled beneath her like a puzzle she couldn't solve. The phone call had fractured something deep inside her. The memories of her father's abandonment, of the broken promises, now flooded her thoughts like a tidal wave. Every question she had ever had about him, about the past, was now at the forefront. The weight of it all felt unbearable. But she knew she had to choose. She couldn't live in this limbo forever. To move forward, she would have to confront the painful truth of her father's absence and her own complicity in letting it go. With trembling hands, she dialed the number again. This time, there would be no hesitation. She was ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. The phone rang, but this time, it wasn't like the others. There was no static. No eerie silence. Only the unmistakable sound of someone on the other end, waiting. Lena's heart thudded in her chest as she picked up the receiver, the weight of the decision she had just made hanging like an anchor around her neck. She had chosen. "You've made the right choice," the voice on the other end whispered. It was Simon. Lena's throat tightened, her breath shaky. "What do you want from me?" "Everything," he replied, the calmness in his voice betraying the gravity of what she had just committed to. "You've opened the door, Lena. Now there's no turning back." For the first time in weeks, Lena felt the fear and the excitement intertwining. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The past, the truth, her father, it was all converging now. But she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next. Lena stood at the threshold of something she couldn't fully grasp, something far darker than she had anticipated. After the call, after the revelation, her world had become a haze of sharp edges and broken promises. She had taken a step into a world where nothing could be unseen, where every action had a ripple that threatened to tear through the very fabric of her existence. The days following her decision felt like a fever dream. The apartment, which had once been a sanctuary from the outside world, now seemed to close in around her. The quiet, once a welcome companion, had turned oppressive, amplifying every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside. She hadn't heard from Simon again, but his presence loomed over her, a shadow that stretched far beyond her own thoughts. Lena spent her time pacing, trying to piece together what she had learned and what she still didn't know. She had committed to something she couldn't undo, something that would change everything. Yet, despite the tension in her chest, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of something else. Not hope, exactly, but a strange kind of clarity. She was about to meet the truth head-on. It was no longer a matter of waiting. The clock was ticking. In the distance, a low hum of traffic sounded, a dull roar that seemed like the heartbeat of the city, a reminder that life went on. But for Lena, everything had already changed. And in this calm before the storm, she had the sinking feeling that she was standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Lena had known it was coming, but when the knock finally came at the door, her heart nearly stopped. It was different now, her pulse racing, a cold sweat beating along her neck. The moment of truth had arrived, and she could no longer avoid it. The question of what would happen next wasn't just abstract anymore. It was real, solid, and imminent. With trembling hands, she opened the door, and there he was, Simon. His presence was imposing, but it was his eyes, dark and unreadable, that sent a chill down her spine. He didn't speak, but his gaze alone seemed to pierce through her, as though he could see every crack in her resolve, every layer of her uncertainty. "You've come this far," Simon said, his voice steady and without emotion. "Now, you need to know what it costs." Lena felt the weight of his words sink into her, heavier than she had expected. The stakes were higher now, the game no longer something she could walk away from. She knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just about the past, it was about the future, about the choices she would have to make in the coming hours. "Are you ready?" Simon asked, his tone cold, almost indifferent. Lena swallowed hard. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. There was no turning back now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firmer than she had expected. And just like that, the world tilted. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew she was in too deep to back out now. The confrontation with Simon was just the beginning. What came next, what followed in the hours that stretched on into the night, was something Lena hadn't fully prepared for. She had made her decision. She had crossed the threshold. But the weight of her choice now pressed down on her like a 1,000-pound stone. She had stepped into a world of secrets, a world where truth was both a weapon and a curse. Simon led her through a maze of alleys and empty streets, the city now a ghost of its daytime self. The night was thick, suffocating, and Lena couldn't help but feel the weight of each step. Each choice she had made was leading her deeper into something she couldn't control. But still, she followed. She had to. They arrived at a door, unmarked, darkened by time and neglect. Simon didn't hesitate. He pushed it open, and inside, Lena was met with something she could barely process: an old, forgotten room filled with discarded memories, files, photographs, and evidence of lives long abandoned. It was here, in this forgotten space, that everything would come to a head. Simon's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "This is it," he said quietly. "To understand the truth, you must be willing to sacrifice something you've held dear." Lena's chest tightened as she looked around the room, at the memories staring back at her. What would she have to give up to uncover everything? What was she willing to lose? It wasn't until she reached the table, the one littered with old photographs and documents, that the answer became clear. She wasn't just giving up her past. She was giving up her future, her peace of mind, everything that had once made her who she was. To unlock the truth, she had to let go of the life she had built. And as the papers in her hand fluttered, she knew that the price was higher than she had ever imagined. Lena stepped out of the room, the door closing softly behind her as though it were sealing away a part of her life she would never be able to retrieve. The cold night air hit her face, biting at her skin like a harsh reminder of the choices she had made. Her hands still shook, the weight of the documents she had just uncovered pressing heavily against her chest. The truth was no longer hidden in the shadows, it was out in the open, raw and undeniable. She didn't know where to go. Didn't know what to do with the knowledge she now held in her hands. The city around her was just as it had always been, alive, vibrant, and indifferent to her pain. But for Lena, it felt like everything had shifted. The world was the same, yet she was no longer a part of it. The life she had lived, the life she had fought to build, felt like a distant memory, like something someone else had experienced. The rain began to fall softly, the first drops cool against her skin. Lena didn't move. She stood there, staring out into the dark streets, unable to process the enormity of it all. There was no relief, no catharsis from uncovering the truth. Only a lingering emptiness, the hollow ache of sacrifice. In the distance, a faint siren echoed through the streets, a reminder that life continued, that the world would go on whether she was ready for it or not. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had changed irrevocably. What had she lost? What had she gained? There were no answers in the rain, no answers in the city. There was only the quiet hum of the world, indifferent to her pain. Lena walked, though she didn't know where to. The city had once been a place of possibility, of hope, of fleeting connections. But now, it felt like a prison. Each step echoed with the weight of her decisions, each turn she made only taking her farther from the woman she used to be. There was no going back. Days passed, but the world never stopped moving. The calls stopped coming, the phone grew silent once more, as if the universe had decided that Lena had seen enough. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. She didn't know how to move forward, not yet, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stay in the past. The truth, though painful and devastating, had unlocked something within her. She could no longer live in denial, could no longer shield herself from the pain she had been running from for years. She spent days, then weeks, piecing together what was left of her life. The city, which had once seemed so vast, now felt small, familiar. She walked through it as if she were a stranger, trying to find her place in a world that had shifted beneath her feet. The truth had changed her, but it hadn't destroyed her. There was still something left, a spark, however faint, that refused to be extinguished. And as she passed by the familiar street corners, the alleyways where she had once run from her past, Lena understood that this was her new beginning. It wasn't an easy one, and it would take time to rebuild. But the road ahead, though uncertain, was hers to walk. In the stillness of the evening, Lena sat on the same bench where, months ago, she had thought her life was ending. The city around her had changed, and so had she. The truth had come at a cost, but in the end, it had offered her something she hadn't expected: the chance to reclaim what had been taken from her. The past was still there, just out of reach, but she had learned to live with it. The phone, the calls, the secrets, they no longer held power over her. She had let go of the need to understand everything, to make sense of it all. Some things simply were, and that acceptance was freedom in itself. The wind blew softly through the trees, rustling the leaves. The same breeze that had always been there, now carrying with it the scent of a future that was hers to shape. The final echo of the phone calls, the truth, faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet of the evening behind. As Lena looked up at the sky, a sense of peace settled over her. The journey had been long, painful, but it had led her here to this moment, to this quiet place. And in that silence, Lena finally understood: the hardest truths were not always the ones that broke us. Sometimes, they were the ones that set us free.